With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shekalim, Daf, Chai, Daf Yud Ches. We're going to continue to learn about the 10 additional Shulchanois and the 10 additional Menorahs that Shlomo HaMelech had made to be used in the Bayis Rishon. And on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, we're going to discuss finally the Mishnah about the 13 shofros, the 13 collecting chests, the 13 pushkas that we had in the Beis HaMikdash. We're going to be learning a machlokes tanoim, whether there was a chest, whether there was a shofar for the people that were obligated to bring bird karbanos, pairs of birds, chatos and oila. And as we will see, that this is all really contingent upon the question whether we say bereira or whether we do not say bereira. If we do not subscribe to retroactive clarification, then if one were to place monies for an obligation pair of birds in the chest, and if something were to happen to the owner, and then as we have been learning that chatos shemeisu balea, the animal has to be left to die. If there is money to buy a chatas, shemeisu balea, it has to be destroyed, it has to be thrown into the Yam HaMelech. These monies, if you do not subscribe to Bereira, will never become batal, so all the monies in the chest will not be allowed to be used, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda will hold that for obligation bird karbanos, the owner either brought the birds or the money directly to the kohen. And as we'll see how they understand Pshat regarding two chests that were used for bird karbanos, they were both for donation bird karbanos. We're going to be learning some details about a person who pledged to bring wood offerings, that we consider the wood a offering. What will be the minimum amount of wood that someone needs to bring if they just pledge to bring wood stam? Similarly, if a person pledged to bring levaina stam, what's the minimum amount of levaina one has to bring? If someone pledged to bring gold or a golden coin stam, what will be the minimum amount of gold that one has to bring? And at the end of Daf Yud Ches, we'll be learning a little bit about an event that happened during the times of the king Yoyash, that prior to Melech Yoyash, the Aliyah and her 6 sons, Pashit, made a churban in the Bayis Rishon. They damaged the Beis HaMikdash. Melech Yoyash and Yehoyada, the Kohen Gadol, they refurbished, they fixed over the first Beis HaMikdash, and we're going to be learning about the various collecting chests, or whether there was only one collecting chest that they that they set aside for people to donate money. And what was the money in there used for, aside of the temple renovations and a lot more. Chavre, we left off on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amud. We are now learning about the 10 shulchanois that Shlomo HaMelech added in the Bayis Rishon. Yes, we quoted the pasuk in Malachim. We quoted the pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, that there were 5 and 5, that the 10 additional shulchanois were not placed in a single row, correct? However, the Braisa that we will start to learn our sugya right now, and this is a similar sugya that we have in Menachos Talmud Bavli, Daf Tzadik Ches, Daf Tzadik Tes, is based on the premise that the shulchanois, and subsequently right away in Daf Yud Ches, the menorahs were placed in a single row. And we'll see how this really will create a challenge. Now, a few words of introduction. When a person entered the Heichel, just to become familiarized with the dimensions of the Heichel, if you're going from Mizrach to Ma'ariv, or the length of the Heichel had 40 amas, and the length of the Kodesh Kodshim had 20 amas. So there was a total of 60 amas. If we are going to consider both of these environments as one environment, as we will over here, so then the way we're going to word it is that the first third of these 60 amas were left empty. There was nothing, not the shulchan, not the menorah, not the mizbeach hazav. None of them were placed in the first third of those 60 amas, or in the first half of the heichel. All of these kalim were placed in the innermost half. Or if you want to word it, if we're going to take in account also the 20 amas of the Kodesh Kodshim, they were placed in the inner 2/3, in the inner 40 amas. But let's focus on the Heichel. So the 20 amas closest to the outside was left empty, and the kalim were put in the innermost ones. That's step number 1. Step number 2, clearly this it says in the Chumash and Parshas Truma that the shulchan was placed on the northern side. shulchan was batzafin, and again, when you're facing west, when your back is towards the east and you're facing west, then the north is to your right. So if you were to enter the heichel, the shulchan was to your right, and the menorah was towards your left. Now, based on the premise, Chavra Haltkop, that the shulchanos were placed in a single row, the Torah writes the dimensions of the shulchan. The oirech of the shulchan was 2 amas. So even if they were placed, mamish, one touching the other, and let's begin touching mamish the wall or the curtain going into the Holy of Holies, right? 10 shulchanos, each one 2 amas. So then that took up 20 amas of the heichel. Now, if they would be going from east to west, even though, of course, when you put one back to the other, it cannot fit exactly within 20 amas, there is a little bit of a protrusion in the eastern part of the room, nish geferlach. That's 100% acceptable, because at least they all will be in the innermost part of the room. However, as we will learn, there was another shita that held that the direction of the shulchanos was not east-west, but it was north-south. And if it was north-south, then you have yourself a problem. Aside of the technical problem that it took up the entire room, it mamish went from the northern wall to the southern wall because the width was 20 amas, but really something that takes up 20 amas cannot fit within a room that's exactly 20 amas. Now the Gemara in Menachos elaborates a lot more, and a big part of the solution obviously is that we just read the pasuk in the end of yesterday's shiur that they were not on a single row, but the Gemara doesn't elaborate that much over here, and let's begin learning inside. So Chevra, we are up to Daf Yud Zayin Amid Beis by the 2 dots, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Says the Gemara Tani, we learned in a Braisa regarding the Shulchanos of Shlomo HaMelech, that Mizrach Umayrev Hayinasunim, that the Shulchanos were placed lengthwise. Again, guys, let's begin, that they were a single row. So says the Gemara, and these are the words of Rebbe. However, Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon holds, no, that they were a single row. That's the beginning of the understanding, but they went in the direction of Tzafain Darim Chayin Asunim. No, it's the length of the table was in the width of the heichel. Says the Gemara, you should know that man, the Amar Mizrach Mairev, which is the sheet of Rebbe, Nichat, it's good, because Kulhun, Ru'uyin, L'Sheirus, they are all fit to be used, even though we learned a machloikas at the end of yesterday's sugya, whether de facto they were actually used or not, but L'Kula Almay, they have to be fit to be used, and for them to be used, they have to be placed, like we explained, in the innermost half of the heichel, or in the 2/3, the inner 2/3 of the heichel. That's if we take the Kodesh Kachim in account, and it works. Doesn't work exactly, because it takes up 20 amas, so Mistama, it protruded a little bit in the eastern part of the room, but it's fine enough. The ruba, even of that 10th one, was still within the innermost half. However, points out the Gemara, the last line in the Amid, that man the Amar, according to the Shita, which is Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, that Safin V'Darim, if they were in a single line and they took up 20 amas, so then they for sure entered the southern half of the room. Nimtza Shulchan Bedarim. And therefore, those 5 are not Ra'ui L'Sheirus. And this is a problem. Now, something very interesting happens in the formulation of Talmud Yerushalmi, as the Tiklin points out. First of all, guys, we learned this in Menachos, Daf Tzadik Ches, Daf Tzadik Tes. And yes, I know the solution will be, we just learned it above, that it was not on a single line. 100%. The Gemara in Yerushalmi does not elaborate on opinions that are not accepted in halacha. That's what the Tiklin Chadatin writes 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. It's mamish beautiful. And 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. And uvenishar bekushia. The Gemara here in Yerushalmi remains with the question. V'leichash laharich bekushia so acheres that we have on Talmud Bavli. Like we mentioned, even if it's going to be divided into 2 rows, it doesn't exactly fit only in the northern half, because the northern half was 10 amas. And I get it that 5 shulchanos take up 10 amas, but think about it, my friends. If you measure a room, and from one wall to the other there is 10 amas, and you have a piece of furniture that is in itself 10 amas, it's not going to fit in there. You have to have a little bit of space. It has to be a little bit less than 10 amas. All of these details are not discussed here. Why? So says the Tiklin, because the last line in the Amid, the lace hilchas kavase de Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon. And why is that? Because the rule is the halacha kirebi meicha veiroi, And v'gam stamas nissen de menachos vayn tiklin chalat and daf yudches kavasi de Rebbe, and v'lav urche di Yerushalmi laharich b'pulpula sholay alibel de hilchasa. Amazing. So a big innovation of Talmud Bavli is that even though they knew this is not the halacha, they spent a lot of words elaborating that other opinion, which is not done over here. Okay, we're going to move on to Daf Yud Ches. Now, our version will skip the first 3 words in the Amid, and we're going to continue. Tanei, we learned in a Braisa, okay, that Hashulchan Hoyonasun Machatzi Habayis V'Lefnim. Chatzi Habayis is when you don't take the Kodesh Kachim into account. If you're looking only at the length of east-west of the Heichal, it is 40 amas. And as we mentioned, the Kalim, this is not only the Shulchan, all the Kalim, which is the Shulchan, the Menorah, and the Mizbeach, they were not placed in the first half. And number 1. So first of all, they were placed only within the innermost half. Very good picture. Number 2, now if you are looking at the Shulchan vis-a-vis the right wall, the northern wall, how close or how far was it from the northern wall? Says the Braisa, Mashuch min HaKoisel, it was put away. It went to the south of the northern wall. How far? Not in the middle. Don't forget, the middle of that half was 10 amas. The middle of that half would be 5 amas. It was only removed 2.5 amas. Beis amos umechzek lafit sofain. And as we have more details in Menachos, since the Kohanim, when they would enter the Shulchan to place the new breads, the ones carrying the new breads walked on the northern wall, you need to have pashut room for the Kohanim to walk and to carry the breads and to do all of the maneuvering that they needed to do. And the amount of space that they needed was these 2.5 amas. Now the Braisa says that when we placed the menorah in the Heichal, it was exactly east-west on the same distance towards the west. It was mamash opposite the Shulchan, and furthermore, the menorah, how much to the north of the southern wall did they place the menorah? The same 2.5 amas. So they were mamish, it was very symmetric. And the Mizbach Hazav, which is the 3rd holy article in the Heichal, for which there was always only one, it was the middle of the room. And my friend, middle means both east, west, middle. Both north, south, middle. However, Choylik es Habir, and Choylik es Habir, it divided the room, Machatzi v'lefnim, but Mashuch Kima Klape Chutz. But if the 3 articles were not in the same row, north, south, the Mizbeach Hazav was in the middle of the room. It was not in the eastern half. It was already in the middle towards the western half, but in the beginning of the western half, and the Shulchan, which will be to its right, and the menorah to the left, went further west a bit. In other words, we didn't want for there to be anything interposing, creating, so to say, a barrier between the Shulchan and the Menorah. They wanted them, so to say, to fully face each other, as it says in the Pasuk. And v'chulhan, and all 3 of them, hayunasun mishlish habayis v'lefnim. They were in the 3rd of the house. Now, we said half, we said 3rd, that's the pshat like we explained. That when you take the amos of the kachik kachim, yes, into account, if you look at the kodesh and the kachik kachim as one environment, so how long was it east to west? 6D amos? And being that we placed the Mizbeach Hazav in the beginning, so to say, of the middle of the Heichal, so that was in the beginning, if you want to put it into thirds, it was a 3rd of the room. Says the Braisa weiter, just like we had the 10 Shulchanos of Shloimeh, whether they were in a single row, whether they were in a double row. We have the machlokas, whether they went like I have in the picture, east, west, or whether they went north, south. Similarly, says the Braisa, Esem Menoides also Shloimeh. King Solomon also added 10 Menoides, as it says clearly in Divrei Hayomim, Vanas Vayaas Es Menoides Hazav Eser. And here we have to change the version to Kimishpatam, because it's in the plural. And Vayitin Behechal Hashem. Here again you have Behechal. Behei miyamin, behei mismoil. End of verse. Says the Braisa that Ein Teimar. Don't say that Chamesh B'Tzafin, that 5 of the menorahs were mamash in the northern half of the room. No, and 5 were in the south. That can't be, because as it says, it says clearly in the Chumash that Hamanoida has to be noichach hashulchan, it has to be opposite the shulchan. Al yerach hamishkan, on which side of the mishkan? Teimana, the south. So, what does it mean in Divrei Hayomim? Chamish miyamin v'chamish mismail. What it means is elo chamish miyamin min noirasei shel Moshe and v'chamish mismaila. These 10 additional ones were a side of the one that Moshe Rabbeinu made. So really, there were 11 menorahs, and the 10 that King Solomon added, 5 to the right and 5 to the left, but they were all in the southern half of the Heichel. The Heichel had 20 amas width, so all of them needed to be within the 10 amas towards the left or towards the south. And as we also have other chazals that even when you daven Shemona Esrei, yes, we face Yerushalayim, but do you face Yerushalayim straight, or do you go a little bit towards the north or a little bit towards the south? So that was that segula that haroitz Allah hachkim. If you want to get more wisdom, then yadrim, then you should daven a little bit to the south, because the menorah represents wisdom. So face a little bit the southern side. If you want to become wealthier, haroitz Allah hashir, then yatspin, then face a little bit to the north. Or as we mentioned, some people when they shakal Shemona Esrei, they go like this, they go back and forth. That's where it came from, because they want both to have the chachma and the wealth. Now, back as we had by the Shulchan, that we had a machloikas tanoim whether all 11 were used or only the one that Moshe Rabbeinu made. Here also the same tanoim, afal pikein, even though you had an additional 10, which menorah was kindled every day, only the one that was made by Moshe Rabbeinu that was also in the bias. As it says in the Beis HaMikdash, umenoi ras, you have to know the digduk, not umenoi rois. Menoi rois is plural. Menoi ras metapatach is lashon yachid. Umenoi ras hazahav, and this is divrei hayamim. This is about the Beis HaMikdash. V'nei roiseha levoir ba'erev is the charai that there was only one menorah that was lit. However, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, al kulam hayim avayir. And here we have another pasuk, which is really a stira and psukim, which is a big issue, like we had in the end of yesterday's shiur. By the Shulchan also we have a contradiction of verses. Shneimar, as it says, ve'es haminoi rois in the plural, v'nei roisei hem leva'aram kamishpat, and they were placed lifnei hadavir, before the partition, and the gold that was used for these menorahs are called zahav sagur, closed gold. It was the most valuable gold that ever existed. And whenever a merchant would sell that gold, all the other gold merchants would shut their shops. There'll be no business for them. That's one of the reasons we had in the Gemara in Bavli why it's called closed gold. And with all the details, that v'haperach, v'haneiros, and the flowers, and the lamps, v'hamelkochayim, and the tongues, zahav kuhu, it was all gold, michlois of finishing gold. What does it mean, finishing gold? End of quote. Explains the Braisa that hein kilu zahav shel Moshe. Or we're going to change the version. Hein kilu zahav shel Shlomo. That it finished off the gold of Shlomo HaMelech. What does it mean? It finished off Shlomo HaMelech was Shlomo HaMelech. Guys, if you remember the sugya, how much value would the menorah have today? We made a cheshbon mamish of billions of dollars on Aguzma. And we'll see in a moment how we get to that, at least in general. Says the Gemara, that Tani, we learned in a Braisa, Rav Yehuda B'Shem Asi says that Shlomo HaMelech took 1,000 kikars of gold, even though the Torah writes explicitly that the weight of the gold of the menorah is 1 kikar. But he did not use 1 kikar, because gold can be refined and more refined and more refined. Shlomo HaMelech began with 1,000-fold, with 1,000 kikars of gold. And he put them into a refinery, and every time he refined the gold, it diminished substantially the weight of the gold. And he put it in there, until Shlomo HaMelech refined what people normally used as gold, to the level that 1,000 kikars became one, and then he made 1 menorah. So 10 menorahs was 10,000 kikars of gold. Zohav kikar zohav tahor. See, the Torah adds the words pure, asa Oisa, and indeed, Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yosi, Bei Rabbi Yehuda, Maise b'mneiras Zohav, Sh'asa Moshe Mamidbar. That v'hoisa, you say the dinar Zohav, the weight before Moshe Rabbeinu had the challenge, had to make it properly. Before that, he began with a kikar weight, but the kikar weight that he had was a kikar plus the weight of a golden dinar. So, okay, no problem. All you need to do is you have to refine it. Every time you refine it, you diminish the weight. But Moshe Rabbeinu was not successful initially because he put it into this refinery, not once, but 80 times, and it still had that additional weight of a dinar. So first of all, that proves that the gold that Moshe Rabbeinu used was taka pure. It was so pure that you couldn't refine it anymore. But this poses a question in what we learned above. Shlomo HaMelech managed to refine it to the point that every time he put it in this refinery, it substantially had a diminished amount of weight. And Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't diminish. After 80 times, he could not get it down 1 dinar. So the Gemara explains v'yais, but it's not a problem. This is good. Because before you refine it until it becomes Zohav Tahir, then avade, have a chaser, sigin. Then every time you put it into the refinery, it's going to lose a lot of weight. But min do koyim al birarei. But the moment you make it into Zohav Tahir, then there's nothing else to remove from it, so that you can't refine it anymore. Then like chasar klum, which explains why Moshe Rabbeinu, who began with pure gold, was unable through putting it into a refinery to diminish the golden dinar weight, and therefore he needed to remove it itself. And putting it in the refinery didn't work anymore. Chavre, we're going to continue now with the next Mishnah, Daf Yud Ches. All of this is going back to the Mishnah, Daf Tez Vav Amid Beis. The first din in the Mishnah was about the 13 shoifrois, the 13 collecting chests that we have in the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Mishnah, Shloisha Asar Shoifros Hayo B'Mikdash. Now what we will learn from the Gemara is that they were actually placed in a circle. Okay, but we'll get to those details later. First, we're going to define what each one was for. So they actually had a plaque on each shofar for people to know what is that shofar meant for. And we're going to go to number 1, number 2, number 3, v'chuli. So because of Aliyah, the first one the Mishnah mentions, shofar number 1, tiklan chadat in the new Shekalim. So the Shekalim that were donated this year went into that collection box. From there, it went into the lishka. Let's not forget that. And then, like we learned above, it was removed from the lishka 3 times a year. Then box number 2 was tiklan atikin, the old shkalim. Now, the old shkalim were certainly the shkalim that were brought for a prior year. Someone forgot to give in Tavshan Pei. They brought a Tavshan Pei Aleph for the prior year, but we also learned above, those who hold that even shkalim that are being brought this year, if they only reached the Beis HaMikdash after the 3rd Truma, they were also put in the tiklan atikin. A little bit more about that soon. Then number 3 was a box upon which it said kinim. Now, kinim, a cane or a kan, means a pair of birds. Whenever karbanos come in birds, not always, actually sometimes, like a woman who's a yoledis, if she can afford, she would bring an animal and 1 bird. But the Torah writes, if she can't afford the animal, she would bring 2 birds. We're speaking about kinim, l'chayra, is the pair of birds. But birds can come as an obligation, but they can also come as a donation. A person can donate an oila bird and they come in pairs. So kinim, 1 box, we'll see exactly what that box was used for. And the other one was v'goizlei oila, young oila birds. Actually, there are only 2 bird types that are fit to be offered on the Mizbeach, right? One of them is called toirim. Toirim is dafka mature turtle doves. And then you have b'nei yoina. B'nei means young pigeons. L'chayda, that was the goizlei oila. The next box, upon it said the word eitzim, wood. The next box, upon it said levoina, frankincense. The next box had in it zohav likepoi rois, with a chaylam, gold for service vessels. And now we have 6 left, so all the 6 had in it written the word nidava. Nidava means voluntary, communal carbon oilers. Now, why did you need to have 6 boxes for the same carbon type? We'll see all these details soon as we unpackage the sugya. Now the Mishnah continues. Tiklan chadat in box number 1 was used shebachol shana v'shana for the shkalim that are brought every single year for that year. The box that had in it box number 2, tiklan atik in the old shkalim, which is, and what the Mishnah is saying now is l'kula alma mishalei hevi ishtaked. If someone forgot or whatever. They didn't bring the prior year, so then it's not that you lost a year or you lost a mitzvah. No, make it up. Shekel l'shana haba. So then in the next year, you would bring it for the year prior. And again, we did learn, Chevra, just quickly going back to Daf Yud, Amid Beis, we learned there an opinion that holds, and it doesn't contradict, that not only was the people deposit shkalim for the prior year, like we mentioned, if their shekel for this year only reached the Beis HaMikdash after the third Truma, so then that was also put in the box of Tiklin, Atikin, and that doesn't contradict what the Mishnah is writing at all. Kinim. So now we're going to have the first shita, which is the shita of Rebbe Yehuda, which will hold that there was never a box in which to put obligation bird karbanis. Both the boxes were for voluntary karbanis. So why do you need to have two boxes? Simple. Kinim, if someone promised and they specified that they're going to bring the bird type called toirin, which are turtle doves. They actually have to be when they are considered mature. If you remember the details, that the neck becomes yellowish, which is a sign of maturity, so they have to be brought dafka after they become yellow by the toirim. And goizli oyla are also for donation birds, but they are for someone pledged to bring bnei yoina, young pigeons, and then they have to be brought before the next turn yellowish, but both boxes were kol on oylos, divided Rabbi Yehuda. Now, by the way, if a person donated bird karbonis, they did not need to specify what bird type. But if they did, I am pledging to bring a pair of oyla birds from Toirin, then they have to bring Toirin. So for the Beis HaMikdash, not to confuse one bird type with the other, for that you had two boxes. However, the Chachamim disagree. First of all, most people didn't specify what type of bird. Second of all, even if they did specify, you don't need a separate box. You can put the money for the birds in a pekala, and on the bag it should say either Toirim or Bnei Yoina. It can go all in the same box, because it's all donation karbanis. Fakert, the Chachamim hold that the box of Kinim was the box in which people placed money, the people that were obligated to bring bird karbanis. And whenever there is an obligation to bring bird karbanis, so then echad lachatos, the echad la'oila. And the guys le'oila were all for oilos. And indeed, according to the Chachamim, if someone specified, I'm going to bring toirim for oilos, then they would write, they wouldn't just put in the money. Let's say it would cost $5. They would put the $5 in a little bag, and they would write on the bag that I promised toirim, or I promised bnei yoina. But they always use the same box, and their underlining machloikas will be discussed in the beginning of the Gemara. Now, if a person says and the person did not specify how much wood was included in his statement, so the rule is lo yivchais mishnei gezirim, he should not bring less than 2 blocks of wood. Why is that? As we'll learn in the Gemara, had he used 8 b'lashon yachid, we will show that even 1 block of wood is a proper wood offering. He used Lashon Abim, so he has to bring 2. There's a big chiddush to that, because we're going to learn this in Masechtas Talmud, because the morning that we had to bring up on the altar wood for the new day, one kohen brought up 2 gizrei eitzim. So one might have thought that 2 gizrei eitzim is the minimum amount of wood, and therefore if a person used Lashon Abim, maybe he has to bring 4. But we'll see it's not so. Because in the Talmud, Shalbeinu Arbayim, you also brought up 2 gizrei eitzim, but in the afternoon, one kohen brought up 1 block of wood, and another kohen brought up another block of wood. And that's the raya that every wood in itself is considered a carbon, and you bring 2 because he used a plural expression. Levaina, he didn't say how much, so the rule is le'yivchais mikaimitz, not less than the amount of a kaimitz. A kaimitz, my friends, is that when you bring a flower offering, in most cases, from a Yisrael, right? So then the Kohen will put his hand in a certain way inside the Klei Sharis, and he will remove the amount of mincha that will fit into the pointing finger, the middle finger, and the ring finger. And then he'll make sure with the thumb that nothing protrudes out of the pointing finger, the index finger, nothing protrudes out of the ring finger. He'll use for that the pinky. And that kaimitz is the amount of the flower offering that he brings. Now with every flower offering, levaina has to come. You don't take a kemitza from the levaina. Question is, how much levaina has to be brought? And all of it was put on the mizbeach. All of the levaina. But the amount of a kaimitz. And we'll see in the Gemara from where we learned that. So since, yes.
Can you just clarify one thing? With all these boxes, it's someone that decides he wants to donate money to go towards that category.
Correct.
Meaning, I'm not bringing the kinim. I just want to pay a nedava.
Exactly.
It's my gift to the Beis Hamikdash. How much? And it goes into that box.
Or Danny, or if I'm obligated to bring two birds, I'm a zav. A major zav has to bring a side of.
I'm obligated. Why wouldn't I just go buy my birds from the bird seller and then bring them?
Because there's a big line. I don't want to wait online. It was much simpler. And based on Kahana Marzidizin, I know that I have to bring, when I'm obligated, so that I'm a Chusar Kippurim until it's brought. But based on the Kahanam Zrizim, I know for sure that all of the money in these chests will be used today. So it was a much easier way to do it. That's why it was done. And Enochanami, by the way, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that there wasn't a box for obligation bird karbanis, you needed to bring your birds, all your money directly to a kohen. Enochanami. There wasn't even an option. The Chachamim held there was an option, and many people made use of that option. They were in a rush. Let's go weiter.
The Kohanim don't have to have in mind what they're bringing in the carbon.
Oh, so that's the whole Masechtas Kinim. It's definitely better when I put the money in there, not to specify which one should go for the chatas, which one to go to the oila, because if these two birds get mixed up, oy gewalt mamish, what happens? And what the Kohen does is, he says that from whomever this came from, it should be for him. You know, Rabbi Chaim, the whole sugi we had in the beginning of Zevachim, that you have to bring a carbon l'shem ba'alim, that was the whole beginning, that the Gemara establishes that when karbanos are brought, they can be brought stam. Stam is good. The whole issue, did they have in mind the right owner? Did they have in mind the right carbon? It's all, if you began to specify your machshava, then potentially you can ruin everything. But you leave it stam, it's much simpler. Weiter. So again, the amount of levaina has to be the minimum of a kaimitz. So how much, if I'm pledging levaina, when I come to the Beis Hamikdash, I have to ask around, guys, how much money does it cost today to buy in the Beis Hamikdash a kaimitz of levaina? And that amount of money I put in the box. If a person made a pledge to give a golden coin and did not specify, so leifchais from one dinner. Now the Mishnah goes on that the final 6 were all in a dava. Question is, nadava mahoya oisenba. First of all, what would they do with the nadava? So it's specifically for karbanos and specifically loichen ba oilois. Only a karban oila. And what happens with the karban oila? That all of the meat is lashem. This is to God Almighty, and the oilos and the hides go to the kohanim. And now the Mishnah says that you should know that Zem Midrash Darash Yehoyada Kohen Gadol. We'll learn about him again on Amud Beis. He was the Kohen Gadol that was involved in the refurbishing of Bayis Rishon. And he expounded this pasuk that it says in Vayikra, Asham Hu, regarding a carbon Asham, Ashoim, Asham, Lashem, and we got ourselves a huge problem, because in Parshas Tzav, the Torah says, Kachatos, Ka'asham, Torah achas yeh lohem, hakoyin asher yechaper boy lo yeh. The Torah writes in Tzav that the Asham belongs to a kohen. Here we have a pasuk that says the Asham belongs to God. So that's a problem. So he explained it, and he said Zaklal. An Asham proper goes to the kohen. Because, my friends, part of the animal meat is eaten by the kohen. Chatas, like a chatas. Part of the chatas are eaten by kohanim. It's kachim kachim. However, whenever there is a surplus of asham and chatas, they go together, kachatas ka asham. Whenever there is, without getting into the details, so the klal is that a surplus of a chatas and a asham, if it's going to be used, it has to go to an oila. Zaklal kol shuba mishum chatas and mishum ashama. Really, it's from every obligation carbon. That's in the category of kachim kachim. So the rule is, yilakach behem oilos, you buy oilos, and what happens? All of the meat goes to God. So when it says in Vayikra that Asham Lashem, it makes sense. The surplus of an Asham is not for an Asham. An Asham has to come for a specific sin. If it's a surplus, you can't add it. It doesn't go for a Shlamim. Shlamim is Shekalim. It's used for an Oila. So the surplus goes to God. And V'ha'oiris L'Kohanim, which is why it says in Parshas Tzav, Lo yiyah nimsu shnei ksuvim kayomim asham lashem, and the pasuk in Parshas Tzav where asham also referring to the surplus of an asham, but still even by an oila, the oila is going to the kahanim for asham lakoyin. And va'oimen, and as it says, and this is a pasuk from Elachim said by Yehoyada, that kesev asham the kesev chatos yuva beis Hashem. Yuva Beis Hashem l'choyra means that it should be given to God. It doesn't only mean to be put on a chest. And also like kahanim yiyu, because it's both. The meat goes to God and the oiros go to the kahanim, which means you buy from it oilos. Says the Gemara. First we'll explain Why Rabbi Yehuda did not hold that there was an optional box, that there was a box for people to place obligation bor karbanis, and why did the Chachamim argue? So Tanya Amar Rabbi Yehuda, that lo hoya shofar shel kinim beYerushalayim. Guys, the name of the box was kinim. But here in the Baraisa, kinim means obligation. There was no box for obligation bor karbanos. Why? Because it might get mixed with monies that have to be thrown away, and monies will not be bottled, and all of it will be wasted. When will that happen? Because Shema Tomos Achas, or Achas Mehem, there's not the birds. Achas Mehem means the person who put the money in the box. Now, the most common a person who needed to bring bird karbanos were women, a lot more than men, because both when a woman is a zav gedolah, at the end she has to bring karbanos. By the way, a zav gadol also has to, but a zav and a yoledis. Now a yoledis brings an animal and a bird if she can afford, but it was common that after a woman gave birth she would bring two birds. Echad lechatas ve'echad le'oila. Now if a woman who donated money in that box, if she were to pass away, so my friends, an oil is not a problem, but that's the whole issue with the chatas. Remember, from the 5 chatas hamesos, one of the 5 is chatas shemesu be'oleh, that the animal has to be left to die. And what happens if there isn't an animal yet, if there's only money to buy the chatas? So that money has to go to Yamamelach, as we learned. So if the owner died, then the money for the chatas bird has to be destroyed, and it's not bottled with the rest of the money, then all of the money will have to be destroyed. Then imtzu the mechatos meisois will be moravos in all of it. Nakoda says the Gemara, hold on, how can you tell me that Rabbi Yehuda has such a chashash when it says in a Baraisa, Ha'isha she'omer harei olai kain? We're speaking here about a woman who has even though it says she said, but we'll see clearly, we're speaking about a woman who has an obligation chatas to be brought. Let's say she's a yoledes. She may not eat kachim until these 2 karbanos are brought. Says the Braisa, obviously this is the sheet of the Chachamim, mevia de meikain. She brings the money that's needed to buy these 2 obligation birds. She doesn't have to give it to the kohen, but vinoi senatoi, she can just place it bas shofar according to the Chachamim in the box called kinim, daf yud ches amid beis, and the chiddush is, that's for you, Danny, that vaychelas bakachim. She doesn't have to wait. Once you place it in the box, you know that today it's going to be brought. She can't eat kachim until the end of the day. But once it's the end of the day, that evening, she's already beyond her mechusar kippurim because she already had her kapara. Or shemen asatzel kohen, maybe the base is a chaf. There's no fear the kohanim were not lazy. And also, says the Mishnah, says the Baraisa, he doesn't have to worry that maybe the woman passed away. End of Baraisa. Now what's the problem? This is Shitas Chachamim. So again, the Yerushalmi is Bekitzin. If we learned correct pshat in Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, that Rabbi Yehuda has a fear, Shemo, one of these women passed away, then why would the Baraisa not quote Shitas Rabbi Yehuda? When the Braisa, I know it doesn't say it's Chachamim clearly because the Braisa is speaking about the box of the kinim for people that are mechuyev in chisur kippurim. Because if it's a donation bird karbanis, it doesn't affect your permissibility of eating kachim. I know that, but the Braisa should have quoted Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. By the fact that it doesn't is a raya that even Rabbi Yehuda is not chayish. Maybe someone passed away, which is a big sugya also. In Bavli, we don't have such a chashash. So maybe we're not learning correct pshat in our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, don't confuse one thing with the other. No one holds that you have a chashash, maybe the owner passed away. No. You know why Rabbi Yehuda says there isn't a box for obligation bird karbanis in the Beis HaMikdash? Not because of a chashash. Because if you know that someone who placed money in there today, if you know that they passed away, now you got yourself a problem. The Braisa was not speaking about knowing. He's saying, B'chlal, you're not chayish. And by the way, even Rabbi Yehuda is not chayish that someone passed away. He clarifies the Gemara 3 lines from the top of Amid Beis. Ki commenting on when we explained our Mishnah, which we did so correctly, of the Taroivos, and all of the money is going to get ruined, is not because Rabbi Yehuda says we're chayish. It's b'chatra shemesu b'aleim vadai. When it's vadai, then you got yourself a problem. The Braisa was speaking about stam, you're not chayish. But hold on, okay, let's go back to our case. What happens if you know that the woman, you know she placed the money in there, or a man, a zav? If he died, what will the Chachamim do? Because now that money has to be put liyam hamelech. So the Gemara is going to answer it by asking on Rabbi Yehuda that even in the case where you know that they died, the amrinon, right? Even when I know that the owner died, why is all lost? Which is why we don't have the box to begin with. Why don't we say nivrar dalet zuzeh, that you should set aside 4 zuz? 4 zuz is the minimum amount money needed to be spent on the bird chatos. So take the value of the bird chatos, and enachanami, like the animal from one of the 5 chatoy shemesos, by the money it has to be thrown into the Yam HaMelech. So v'nishte ben nahara. Here you see Yam HaMelech is lav dafka, throw it into a nahar, but then v'idach lishteru, then all of the remaining money should be compromitted. So what's the issue? So answers the Gemara, exactly. That is the sugya of Breda retroactive clarification. Since we already know that Rabbi Yehuda leis le Breda. How beautiful is that? So lechachamim taka, they subscribe even by biblical halachos of Breda. So the chachamim, you're not chayish someone is going to die, and if you know that someone died, so take out that money and throw it away, and it doesn't ruin anything else. But since Rabbi Yehuda l'shitase does not subscribe to Breda, so don't have a box because you might witness the owner passing on. Very good. Weiter says the Gemara. This is referring now back to the part of the. Yes, let's move.
Can you just explain one thing? If you don't hold with Brera, and even if there's no one that passed away, you're still putting money in that's supposed to be used for your birds, but it's not going to be your money that gets used for them.
So that's what Rabbi Chaim brought up before, that we learned at the beginning of Zevachim, that a kohen can always bring a carbon stam, even nothing to do with Brera. If the kohen doesn't know which animal this belongs to, this animal belongs to whom, doesn't matter. As long as he does the avodah properly, which is what's important, and chatos, all the details, that a bird oil has to be sprinkled on top of the chota sikra, the bird chatos on the bottom, the oil on the top by the birds. And he says, I'm bringing this for its owner. He doesn't have to know. It's not mixed. The money belongs to Chaim Yankel, belongs to Sarah, belongs to her. The coin doesn't know that this coin belongs. Doesn't matter. He doesn't need to know. He doesn't have in mind anyone specific.
You're saying the coin doesn't have to have it in mind, but there is a specific designation attached to each one of
That's correct.
Coins in the shayfer.
I want to say
get rid of those specific coins.
A designation of an owner, and the owner should not decide which coin is for chatas and which coin is for. Then everything gets messed up. And the coin, remember, there's a few moments when you can designate it. One moment is when he's going to do the malika. During the malika, he decides this is for a chatas, for whoever owns this money, for whoever owns this bird. Let's go back. Going now back to the lishka, to the shofar of Eitzim. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosi Bey Rebbe Bun Amar. I know it's put together. Comma. That you should know that Rabbi Ba Bar Marmol Boi, Rabbi Ba asked. Now, as guys, remember we learned the tiklin that Sha'al in Yerushalmi doesn't mean that he asked the question. He knew the answer. Sometimes he wanted to know if others agree with him. So really, Rabbi Ba is making a statement. But Boi means, do you guys agree with me? What's the statement? That if a person doesn't use, like we have in the Mishnah, the Lashon Rabbim, if he uses Lashon Yachid, if he says Harei Olai eitz, then yes, eitz, then maybe Gezer Echad, that he is allowed to only offer the money that can buy only one block of wood. The reason why the Mishnah said that you have to bring the minimum, the money of Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, was only because they used the Lashon Rabbim. And not because the minimum wood that can be counted as a korban eitzim has to be 2. No. And so that's what, do you guys agree with me? So Amar Rabbi Lezer, not only do I agree with you, but I'll prove that what you're saying is correct. Mas nisan Amar Kain. That shezer karma b'fnei atzmai, v'zer karma b'fnei atzmai. That when even though in the Talmud Shel Shachar, one kohen brought up Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, we don't view both of them together as one carbon. Each gezer, each block of wood is considered a standalone carbon. And indeed, kahai de taninon. That what? This is in Yuma. That over there in Yuma. That by the Talmud Shel Bein Ha'arbayim, 2 kohanim brought up the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. One gezer in the hands of one kohen. Shnayim biyadam shnei gizrei eitzim. Unlike in Shachris. So that is a raya that each wood is considered a standalone carbon. And now l'cha'oira, if we're going to have this version, the Gemara is going to ask like my tama, which means minalan. Where do we find that in the Torah? And we're focusing in the beginning of Parshas Vayikra. It says v'nefesh ki sakriv korban mincha, and the word korban, it comes to add eitzim. So we take a view it as a korban, and that's why they had a box of wood, even though it's like chatzi preliminary, because that wood, as we'll see in a moment, is going to be used to be burning karbanos, but one wood is considered a fulfillment of the vow. Now that we mentioned about the woods, weiter, we're going to have some gewaldige dimensions about the Mizbeach. Now, everything we are learning right now is only regarding the outer altar that was built by Moshe Rabbeinu. We're going to learn in Kachim that Shlomo HaMelech substantially made the Mizbeach much bigger. The Mizbeach of the Mishkan, the Mizbeach that Moshe Rabbeinu or Betzalel made, even though the Pasuk explicitly writes its dimensions, we learn Chitas, it's really a machloikas tanoim how to understand that Pasuk. We're going to go right now with the understanding that the outer altar, even the one that was built by Moshe, which was the smallest one, had 10 amas of height. And as we'll go, I'll say it by heart, guys. We remember this, that the bottom amma was called the amma of the Yesoid. We're going to focus aside of it the fact that it protruded one amma out, but we're going to focus now on the height. There was one amma of Yesoid, and then it went in, and then it went up for another 4 ammas. So you're off the ground already 5 ammas. Then the next amma, very good, I like the picture, is called the Michbar. That was an amma of the Michbar. The amma of the Michbar is some sort of beautiful, some artistic work, whether it was made out of copper, whether it was made out of wood, that it surrounded the Mizbeach and the height of an amma. So now we are already 6 ammas from the ground, or 5 ammas above the Yesoid. Now is where you had the Karkoiv, which is some sort of Reute Bendel that demarked half of the Mizbeach, and the animals whose bloods needed to be thrown under that red bendel. The bloods that needed to throw above needed to go above the Karkoiv. The Karkoiv did not have any height. Right above the Karkoiv was what we call the soiv, the ledge upon which the Kohanim would walk. The ledge went up an amma and also went in an amma. Above the soiv there was another 2 ammas of Mizbeach. And then the top amma wasn't all the way around the Mizbeach, was only on the 4 koronos, the 4 horns. Each horn was a cube, including an amma height. If you were to count now, the 1 amma of the Yesoid, plus the 4 ammas, plus the 1 amma of the Michbar, plus the 1 amma of the Soiviv, plus 2 ammas, plus the amma of the Keren, you have 10 ammas height. Now, how big was the top of the Mizbeach? How wide and how long? So the total space will be of 5 ammas. Now think about it, says the Gemara, if you had 5 ammas, the Keren was an amma cube. It was an amma tall, but it was also an amma long and an amma wide. So we're going to make believe as if the top of the Mizbeach, when you have 5 ammas, and on each side you have a Keren, so it eats up 1 amma from one side, 1 amma from the other side. So you only have really 3 ammas left on top. You also have to have a walkway for the Kahanim to be able to walk all the way around the pyre, the Maracha. But it's 1 amma from one side, it's 1 amma from the other side, it's 1 amma from each side. That's another 2 ammas. So 2 on one side, 2 on the other side. So from the 5 ammas, you ate up 4 ammas. So how much space do you have on top of the Mizbeach to put the Marach itself? Only 1 amma. Only 1 amma. And that's why, as we'll see, that the size of this block of wood, there is a machloikas as to how thick it needed to be. But you know, how wide and how long? It was only 1 amma, but as we just learned that really there are 5 amma measurements. You have the biggest amma measurement, which is 6 tfachim and a bit. Then you have the Beinani, and then you have the Geduma, the little amma. The block of wood was a little amma. Because if there was only 1 amma, 1 square amma space on top of the Mizbeach to put the 8s, you're not going to put a full amma. Because, the fire will go out a little bit. You had a 5 tefach amma, which meant that the fire took up 1 amma by 1 amma, and that's really a miracle, because when you have such a small pyre, and the amount of korbanis that were brought were so amazing, how can it fit on top of that amma? And the answer really is that aside of the fire that we made from here, there was a miraculous fire that appeared in the form of a lion that sat on top of the Mizbeach, and it completely consumed everything that went on top of the altar, and that's how it was shayach for such a small space to consume the amount of korbanos in the time that it indeed did. So let's read inside now more about the wood. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says that I want you to know that oivion, the thickness of every wood, needed to be an amma. That's very thick. And what type of amma? Ba'amma soy chekes, in a expanded amma. Not only not the 5 tefach amma, not only the beininus amma. It was very thick. It was like a block of wood. It was 6 amma and an eighth thick. However, that's only benegayah, the thickness. What about the length and the width? V'archan was only ba'ama, but it needed to be a geduma, which means a truncated, a small amma of 5 tfachim, like we just explained, because you didn't have that much space on top of the mizbech to place the maracha. Rab Chuni, in the name of Rav Ami, he agrees with the oirech and the roichev, which are the same. He disagrees with the thickness. Min hakotze el hakotze, that not only wasn't it an amma thick, forget about an amma that's an expanded amma. It was very thin. It was like a tile that came in turtani. Turtani is some sort of stick utensil upon which scales were hung. It's just a very skinny. It's like a half a finger. It's a very thin block of wood. Says the Gemara, Amar Rab Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak. Yes, there is a machlokes regarding the thickness of each block of wood, but then again, the oirech and the roichev, everyone agrees that it was only an amma by an amma, and it was a small amma, which means it was probably 18 inches, or maybe a drop less, 18 by 18 inches. Why is that? There was only 1 amma space. So if you have an amma of 6 tfachim space, and you're going to put wood to burn a fire, again, you don't fit exactly. We began the sugya today about the shulchanis and the menorah. If all the space you have is exactly 1 amma by 1 amma, and you want to put something in it, it has to be a little bit smaller. And Vatani Kain, and then we're going up the Braisa according to the dimensions of the Mizbeach. So we're beginning from the bottom to the top. The first amma was the Yisoid. Then the next time that the Mizbeach went inwards was by the Soiviv. Now it's interesting that now we mentioned the karkov, which is really problematic because the karkov was under the soiviv, as well as the karkov did not take up any height. So many people understand that the amma soiviv and the amma karkov is the same. And then you have the amma of the koranois. But the key that we're quoting the Baraisa is from just these final words. That based on the premise that the Baraisa doesn't even say that the top of the Mizbeach was 5 ammas by 5 ammas, there was only 1 amma left for the Maracha. Because if you can look here in the picture, forget about the fact that the Keren didn't go all circle around. I don't care about that. But the Kohanim who need to walk around the Maracha can not only walk in between the area of the horns, because they can't walk in the space of the horn itself. So we have to ignore that space. Since the horn takes up an amma from each side, so the outermost amma is deducted. Then you have another amma for the walkway for the Kohanim. Now an amma on each side means 2 ammas on each side. So if you have 5 and you have 2 on one side and 2 on the other side, that are accounted for. The only space that you have to place the pyre of wood is in the center, amma by amma. Amma by amma. And in order for the wood to properly fit there, so it needed to be not just only the size of an amma, not more, it needed to be a small amma. It needed to be an amma geduma. Let's go weiter. Levaina, if a person pledged to bring levaina, he didn't say how much. So the Mishnah says, the minimum amount has to be 1 kaimetz, because that was not that they took a kaimetz from the levaina. When I brought a karba mincha, when we're going to bring a karba mincha, Mashiach will come, we bring a nice amount of flour. Different amounts, the 1 Yisodin, the 2 Yisodin, the 3 Yisodins, from which, if it's from a Yisrael, 1 Kemitza is taken. But we also have to add Levoina, the amount that it would fill up the Kaimitz. The amount of a Kaimitz. So if I pledged only to bring Levoina, it's the amount of a Kaimitz. Now guys, Kaimitz is a subjective measurement, because every coin's hand was a little bit different, and this will affect halachas, as we'll see in a moment. What's the source? It's like my tama, or in Yiddish, Babli, minolan. Because Nemar kan refers to the lechem apanim. Now the lechem apanim had 2 stacks, right? It had 2 arrangements, and there was a boziach, there was a spoon that had in it levaina that needed to be offered on the mizbeach before the kohanim divided the lechem apanim. So the first kan is the lechem apanim. The Torah uses the words that it is a memorial service, a askara. V'nema lahalan, it says regarding all of the flour by your karban mincha, askara. So ma askara amar lahalan, by your karban mincha. It says clearly, meloi kaimetz. Af haskara. Also, when it comes to the levina that was offered together with the lechem apanim, what amount that you have to bring is also ha'amor kan is malay kaimetz, and that's the source. And now we apply that to anything. You promised levina. Well, by the lechem apanim, it was a kaimetz amount. How do we know that from gzeira shava from a mincha? Says the Gemara, I malahalan askara amor lahalan. Is really shnei kumtzen. If we're learning it from the lechem apanim, there were two arrangements. So each baziach had the amount of a kaimetz, but there were really two. So why don't we say afas kanamura kan? Kan meaning our Mishnah. When a person pledges levina, he did not specify how much. She did not specify how much. Why don't we say they have to bring the minimum of shnei kumtzen? Answers the Gemara. Amar Abila. How do we get it all? It's a gzeira shava, all coming from klum lamadnu lekaimetz ella. Skip the parentheses. Really, the source is from minchas chayte. By the normal mincha, one of the menachos, malahalan, just like over there, kaimetz hechasar pasel, which means afkan kaimetz pasel. Let's continue with the gzeira shava. If a person brings a carbon mincha, so if there would be anything less than a kaimetz, right, a flour, it's going to be invalidated. You have to have the amount of a kaimetz. Same thing by the lechem apanim. There were two bazichen. What will happen, my friends, if in one baziach there was the amount of a kaimetz and a little bit, in the other baziach there was a little bit less than the kaimetz? Together you have two kumtzen. Together. From this gzeira shava you learn it won't be good. Each baziach has to have its own full kaimetz. Is a raya that we don't view the two bazichen as one offering, because then all we would care about is the sum total of two kemitzas. No, each one has to have its own kemitzah. Now, by the lechem apanim, you have to bring two. This person pledged levina, so they get to bring one. Furthermore, Amar Rabbi Yosef, that this statement, Milsa de Rab Ila, Amara, he effect is also saying that hamasnadev levina, if you donate levina, since it's all learned from the lechem apanim, right? So mevia bekoinzoi shall koyin gadol, not the koyin gadol as the koyin gadol, but whenever they brought the levina on the lechem apanim, how much levina? Well, it filled up that spoon, but how much the amount of a kemitzah from whom? So you needed to see which, now they made a lottery as to who will be the lucky kohen who's going to put the levina on the mizbeach. But it needed to be enough levina that it would fit into the largest kohen, to the kohen who has the largest hand of that mishmar. Because maybe he'll be the one that's bringing it. So likewise, when you make a pledge of levina, and yet we learned that you only have to bring the amount of one kaimetz, but it's not a standard size. So if I made the pledge today, I have to see from the Kohanim that are doing the Avodah today, who has the biggest hand. And I have to give enough money to get Levina to fill up his hand. And why is that learned from Rabbi Ila? Because the Gzeira Shava is from the Lechem Apanim. To which Rabbi Chizkiah says in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, I disagree with you. Hold on. The Lechem Apanim is not the beginning of the story. The Lechem Apanim, Gzeira Shava from a mincha. Now when a Yid brings a mincha, when I bring a mincha, how much levina do I have to bring? We don't say it has to be enough to fit into the largest kohen's hands. We don't say that. You know why? Because when a Yisrael brings a carbon, a private carbon, we have the option, we have the power to say which kohen should do the avodah. Did you know that? So since I'm allowed to decide which kohen can do it, I can pick a kohen with a smaller hand. Gavaldik. So therefore, similarly, if a person pledges to bring levina, we have to decide which kohen is going to bring it, and it only has to fit into the hand of that kohen. Let's go weiter. When it says in the Mishnah Zahav, a person pledged to bring gold, and the Mishnah says no less than a golden dinar. Amar Abu Lazar, hold on. That's only v'hu shehiskir tzura. That's only if he specified that he wants to pledge a golden coin. So then, a golden coin, the smallest golden coin was a dinar. But if he didn't mention the word coin, all he pledged was gold stam, then what utensil in the Beis HaMikdash needed the least amount of gold? That was the tzinoira utensil. It was some sort of golden fork. So since he didn't specify, he could only bring a much lesser amount of gold that will be needed to turn it into a golden fork. Now, the Mishnah concluded that the 6 boxes from the 13 were all in a dava. Now, we already established that the money that came into those boxes was from the surplus of ashamis and chatois. The problem will be, why 6? So we're going to have a series of opinions. Let's go moving. Chizkiah says, I'll tell you why. Kenegat shisha batayavis. Every Mishman was divided into 6 batayavis. On Shabbos, everyone worked together, but during the weekdays, each one worked on their day. Now, hold on. Which day are going to have more surplus of chatois and ashamis? It's not clear. I'll tell you even more. Which group, even if there's going to be a lot of surplus, when will they bring it? When will they bring it? The Kohanim can only bring these communal donated oilos if the Mizbech is idle. It could be that Sunday the Mizbech was so busy that none of the surplus is going to be brought. Now, who do the hides go to? To the Kohanim. Normally, when it comes to individual korbanos, the hides go to the Kohanim that are doing the avodah that day, from that base off. Here, they didn't want to divide it that way. Because if only the coin that actually brought these donation korbanos oilus, if that one of the base av will be getting the money, it could be there's going to be kina, there's going to be jealousy. Could be today was such a busy day that the Kohanim didn't have time to bring any of those surplus donated communal oilus. So what they did is that they divided that money into 6 boxes equally. So whether they actually did the avodah that day or not, every coin got a equal amount of money. Opinion number 1. Bar Padoya says, Keneget Sheish Behemoths. Hold on, that there are 6 types of animals that are brought as obligations. Kachi Kachim. One is a par, one is an egel, one is a soid, one is an ayil, one is a gedi, and one is a teleh. So if it's a surplus from which animal, that every box was different. Shmuel says, I'll tell you better. Keneged Shisha Karbanis, there are 6 obligation animals that produce this surplus. One is Kinei Zavim, and Kinei Zavis is number 1. Number 2 is Kinei Yoldis. Number 3 is Chatois. Number 4 is Hashamis. Number 5 is Menachis. Number 6 is the Asira Su'efa of the Kohen Gadol. Here again, if there's a surplus, means the Kohen Gadol has to bring every day Asira Su'efa. He designated money. The price of the flour went down. There's a surplus of money that also goes into these boxes. So every box it tells you from where it came. And the final Amar Rabbi Yechanan, no, it's not about that. There was so much Nadava money that it wouldn't fit in one box. We're going to stop over here, God willing, to be continued. We're learning the next time. Baruch, Monday morning, 5 a.m.